Stanford University.
Welcome everybody to How I Write. I'm Hilton Obenzinger. I'm the Associate Director of the Hume Writing Center. I work with honors and advanced writers. And this is an event co-sponsored by Continuing Studies Program and especially tonight the Stanford Humanities Center, which is where we are, as well as the Creative Writing Program. This is a series that's been going on for 8 years now of conversations with writers of all sorts, poets, novelists, engineers, chemists, historians, political scientists. At a university or in life, a lot, people have to write in all sorts of ways, especially at a university, even if they're mathematicians. We want to discuss with people the different ways that people approach writing, the different work habits, the different style issues that come up, all of those sorts of things. And in the course of 8 years, the one thing that we've found out is that people are incredibly idiosyncratic and have their own very firmly established habits, styles of doing things. And it's been quite a learning experience finding out the different ways that people do it. If you saw in the Stanford reports today, there was an article about how I write on web, and you saw some of the quotes of some of the things that, ways that people work, and you can check that out if you want on the Stanford website today. Any case, really pleasure to have a conversation tonight with Gwyneth Lewis, who is now I'm not going to get this right, the creative, what's the official,
Fellow with the Stanford Humanities Center and the Stanford Institute for Creativity and the Arts, otherwise known as SICA.
Okay.
Sponsored fellowship.
Okay.
With many, many syllables.
Appropriate for Welsh. So Gwyneth is spending the year at Stanford working on projects and has a really extensive career as a poet, as a nonfiction writer, as a radio documentary producer, playwright, television also, playwright, librettist. Did I leave anything out in terms of genre? That's about it, right? She was the first Welsh national poet in 2005, and has the one book that we have here is a collection of her books of poems in English called Chaotic Angels. But they're also here, and I'm pointing to these because they're for sale. Two in a Boat, the true story of a marital rite of passage, and a classic title and a terrific book, Sunbathing in the Rain, a cheerful book on depression. So a wide range of styles, a wide range of approaches, genres to writing. And the way that we do this is pretty straightforward. I invite our guest to say whatever she would like about writing. And then I engage in questions, conversation for a while, for about a half hour, and then we open it up for all of you to engage in the conversation as well. Now, there is a little wireless microphone in the back. We don't really need it to amplify in here, but one of the things that we're doing is that we're recording this so that it would go on Stanford on iTunes, where you can go now. There's at least one on YouTube, but on Stanford on iTunes, and some of the conversations are up there. You go to the Arts and Humanities section and then scroll down to Featured Contributors and see the How I Write icon. And there are about 10, 12 of the more recent ones that are up there now that are fascinating if you want to learn how Leonard Susskind, who is into physics, writes, or Terry Castle the last one we did here at the Humanities Center, professor of English, how she writes. So that's the wide range. So welcome everyone, and welcome Gwyneth. And so any opening thoughts about how you write?
Well, I suppose I'll give a bit of background. It's really good to see everybody here tonight. Thank you so much for coming on a not very nice evening, weather-wise. I'll give you a bit of background about how I started to write, because there's a whole history that we have that develops with an activity like writing. I started completely out of the blue when I was 7 years old. And I think it was a wet Easter holiday and we couldn't play outside. So for some reason I decided to write a long poem in rhyme about the rain. And you know, it's long. And it's very, very bad, except it has some things rhyming, you know, about it has a child called Deo and he's smoking, simply because it has to, you know, I needed the rhyme word. So I was being pushed around by words at that point. With experience, you get pushed around less by them, I think, or you learn to stand up for yourself. I wrote from a very young age and discovered that there was a local paper in Welsh, and I was writing in Welsh at this point because we speak Welsh at home. And there was a club where you could earn money by winning a competition writing. So this was a great incentive, I thought. Book tokens it was, that's right. So I would put in poems for that. And then I think some of the unself-consciousness to do with children's writing disappeared at the age of 12 or so, because then we went to high school, and writing poetry is not a cool thing to do at that age. But I wasn't particularly concerned with being a cool person, but I think I did suffer internally for doing the thing that it was. I suppose I feel it's a compulsion, and I do know that whenever I have tried not to write in life, I've been deeply unhappy. It seems to be a non-negotiable item in my life. I have tried to do without it. So as you can see from that statement, I feel somewhat ambiguous about being a poet. Later on, I went to Cambridge to study English literature, which is not guaranteed to help you write at all, because you become so daunted by the literary canon that it completely shuts you up. But I think it's a very good training to be a reader, which every writer needs to be a reader as well. And then I got completely stuck because the big issue of which language to write in reared its head. So I didn't want to go back to Wales because it would have been too difficult to write in English there because of my own community being a Welsh-speaking one. And I didn't want to stay in England because writing in Welsh was considered so eccentric. It was on a par with Morris dancing. I don't know if you know about Morris dancing, but it's, you know, the men dancing with the little bells. It's regarded in that way, which is not the way, it's not an encouraging way to be regarded as a writer. So I came over to America and found a wonderful permissiveness here, and was encouraged by some writers that I rated, and, well, the whole world rates, but by some world-class writers, to begin writing in English and to allow myself to allow my writing to follow a creative trajectory of its own, and to let my life follow it, not the other way around. That's the way I believe it happens. For me, my life comes out of the writing. My writing doesn't come out of my life. And it's quite spooky sometimes when you look at your own work in retrospect and you see, that was already there, you know, before I lived it. So I spent 3 years in America and became very influenced by American poetry. and then went back and got some books written. And I think one of the big discoveries for me, and when I was in creative writing school, they didn't teach you, they taught you how to revise and technical things, but they didn't teach you about the whole life thing about writing. And learning that has been a big education for me. For example, the need for discipline. That it's always worthwhile presenting yourself at a regular time, whether you feel inspired or not. In fact, writing has very little to do with feeling. It has to do with regularity and a permissive attitude towards your subconscious. So for me, that means more or less rolling out of bed and getting straight to writing. In fact, I have difficulty getting out of my pajamas some days because I'm writing from the first thing in the morning while my dreams are still vivid. And I do dream a lot, and that sort of dreaming solves a lot of my problems. There's also the feeding your writing that needs to happen, and that means research, it means reading, it means educating yourself in areas that are not to do with writing. It means looking after yourself. I mean, there's this whole myth of the unhappy writer, which I think unhappiness comes to knock at our doors in life often enough that we don't need to invite it. So I think we actually have to look after ourselves physically and psychologically, and I do to the best of my ability. And that's how you get some writing done. So that's a kickoff.
Great. There's a lot of things that you just raised that I would want to follow up with, and maybe hopefully I will, but I want to do something a little bit unusual for me.
You're going to kiss me?
No. That's not unusual. By the way, speaking of writers taking care of themselves, we have books for sale.
Thank you.
That Gwyneth will sign. Now, what are you working on now? And how, that's what's unusual. I usually start a little bit earlier and then work up. But and what has that process been? Just whatever it is now. I believe you're working on a play, among other things.
No, you're behind the times. Since I saw you, I've been writing my first novella.
Really?
Yes. I was commissioned by a press in Wales to do a retelling of a medieval Welsh myth called there's a collection of them called the Mabinogion. And there's a myth which is about a woman made out of flowers. And it's a very interesting story. It has rape, people turning into animals, incest, brothers having to live as man and wife. It's a lovely story. So I've just rewritten that as a science fiction novella.
Oh, great.
So I've just given that first draft in. And you're quite right. At the same time, I'm working on 2 plays, which have been commissioned by theatres in Wales, and they're retellings of the Clytemnestra story. You've heard some of that because we did a reading at the Clayman Institute. So their stage plays are a new form for me, as is the novella. So I'm trying out a lot of different things, and it's a great, very exciting thing to be able to do. I've discovered I've got carpal tunnel syndrome, and I've discovered that writing more words has its price. It does indeed. Whereas writing poetry is few words, much thought. But at the same time, I'm working on my next book of poems, and I've just brought out a book called A Hospital Odyssey, which is an epic poem about, well, what it says, a journey through a hospital. And that, I think, is going to be on Amazon, available on Amazon soon.
Oh, terrific. Now, it's interesting, 2 of the projects are commissioned.
Yes.
So in some ways you've been given them
Yes, I have.
to work,
Yes, that's right.
to respond
Very
to.
fortunate, yes.
But what's also interesting in the way that Hospital Odyssey I didn't know about, but you also have written, I find it really kind of fascinating about the shuttle.
Oh, yes, that's right.
Space exploration.
I have,
and,
yes.
I love the idea of being the writer in residence in the Department of Astrophysics.
That's right.
In the University of Cardiff. So you go into a lot of different directions for material and for interest.
I'm interested in a lot of things, yes.
And so how, now, given the myth story and then jumping off into it being science fiction-like,
Yes.
what was the process for you in terms of thinking about that and thinking that through?
Well, I only said yes to the commission because I had an idea. I mean, imagine being commissioned to do something that you had no idea what you might do. It always has to be a technical problem for me to be interested in it, in writing. You know, how can I make a space journey interesting? Because you mentioned the space poem. There's a series of poems in here called Zero Gravity. And my cousin is an astronaut. And we got invited out to the launch. Now, astronaut language, space language, what a gift to a writer. But then on the other hand, without using it intelligently, it could be deeply, deeply boring and alienating. You would just be showing off space language. And there's little point to that. That would just be vocabulary exhibitionism. So at the same time as we were going to the launch, my sister-in-law was dying of cancer. So I started thinking about the broader theme of journeys and people going out of sight and whether they disappear or not, and so on and so forth. So from then on, I knew I had a poem, and then at the same time, we had the Hale-Bopp comet came. So we had three journeys at the same time. Did you see the Hale-Bopp here? Wasn't it wonderful? Yes. One thing feeds another. Do you know what I mean? It's a question of putting two things or maybe three things together and seeing what happens between them. It's never a question of just one thing in a room on its own. You can't do anything with that. So I immediately had an idea of doing, I mean, a lot of science fiction does use mythology as its basis anyway. So I thought, why don't I use it the other way and set the mythology in the science fiction? And in fact, I really enjoyed doing it, except for the carpal tunnel problem. But I think you have to, the secret is with working with commissions, and I'm quite used to that, because as National Poet, for example, they would say, right, we're opening a new Welsh Parliament building. It's a kind of once-in-a-lifetime event. Write a poem, please. Now, talk about stress, because you know that everybody in Wales is going to bitch about this poem, because they'll say, well, I could have done better, and they're quite entitled to say so. So how to do something that is true to your own abilities as a poet and to your own interests, while not missing the public occasion. And it's a fine balancing act. But in Wales, we're quite used to doing this because poetry has a role in public life or even in private life as a form of entertainment almost. So it never seems to me a difficult thing to be said. I mean, you could say to me now, write a poem about a tree which has got a crow in it and a pink bicycle. And I would sort of get interested once you'd thrown in the pink bicycle, you know?
Definitely.
Yes, you know, because there's got to be a way of making it work.
Yeah. This is it, right?
There's no pink bicycles in that, no.
This is on this is the Parliament building?
No, the building on the back of the book there, that's the Wales Millennium Centre, which is a theatre. I've written words they're 6 foot high on the front of the building. And the way that happened was, again, a sort of commission. Yeah. Except it was at the last minute. They had been trying to find words for a long time and hadn't managed it. And the chief executive said, would you have a go, Gwyneth? We've got a weekend to do it, to describe the aspirations of a new building, a new theatre. So I thought, well, there's nothing to lose, So I had a go at it, and we came up with something that we liked. And it's great. In Cardiff now, it's become almost a symbol, certainly for Cardiff, almost for Wales. People, you see the building on the news as an image for Cardiff. Yeah, it's
like
good.
An opera house in Sydney.
Exactly, like that. And people say, I'll meet you under the words, which is nice. I like that.
In these stones,
yes.
horizons sing.
In these stones, horizons sing. Now, the Welsh National Opera Company is in that building as a resident, among other theatre companies and writing organisations and so on and so forth.
Well, so one of the things that, of the way you talk about writing on commission, etc., people have this notion of poetry, especially, being this magical, inspirational. Right. Okay. And you want to.
There are many ways.
Apart?
Well, yes. I think there is a way in which poetry is a very shy animal, and it comes only if you stand still for it. And you have to treat it as if you were stalking an animal. And if you make a lot of noise yourself, it's not going to come to you. You need to keep quiet a lot of the time and know when not to talk. And to notice little nibbles. I keep a notebook, and there are little nibbles that come to me during the day, something at the back of my mind or something that somebody else says, and they get lost unless you pay attention to them and write them down. So there is this stalking aspect to poetry. There's also good old-fashioned thinking that can create a poem. I think poetry, great poetry, is perhaps some of the most intelligent cerebral activity that you can have. So it's not just a question of getting carried away by emotion. There's many, many more fibers to it than that. Mm-hmm. But I'm afraid it is rather stubborn, and you have to allow it to come rather than dictate to it. That doesn't work, as we know.
Well, you explain at least one way that you work is rolling out of bed in the morning in your pajamas.
That's always helpful, yes, to roll out of bed is a good thing, yeah.
And so is that the main time of the day that you work?
Mornings are good for me, yes. I think simply because there's less of the front of your brain activity going on. You're not cluttered up. For example, I could never listen to the radio in the morning because I need to be listening to the radio in my brain, which isn't quite quiet yet. Mm-hmm. So I find that very helpful. In fact, when I moved in with my husband, we nearly parted ways because he wanted to have a conversation over breakfast. I said, this can't continue, So he's learnt. He knows not to talk to me in the morning. Yeah.
Do you, the whole process of revision?
Now, I was going to raise revision, yes.
That doesn't happen in the morning, or does it?
It can do.
For you? Yeah.
I've been, until recently, very much not a reviser because everything came in the first draft. I would get one line right and then move on to the next line. But recently I've become interested in revision as a process of its own. Perhaps it has to do with the fact that I've written a lot of formal poetry, and just having finished, 6,000 lines of A Hospital Odyssey, I'm interested in free verse at the moment because I've done a lot of rhyming. Rhyming is quite different from free verse. if you write a lot of rhyme, there is a way in which you are rhyming from the end of the line backwards. And you don't know how you're going to get from one rhyme word to the other, but somehow it comes. And that liberates the subconscious and comes up with some very unexpected connections. Whereas with free verse, it's more the rhythm of thought. I mean, there is, of course, rhyming, internal rhyming, and a metrical measure that's going on that has to be kept whole. But as you change the thought, the shape of the poem changes. So I'm actually revising a lot at the moment and enjoying that process.
And revision for prose is
yes, revision.
is
yes,
similar.
Prose I find easier than poetry. In some ways, it's getting the exact right word every time isn't as crucial. It's more the rhythm of the narrative that you have to get right. If you don't get that right, and if you don't get the clarity of the storyline right, you've had it then. So I think the crucial part of prose lies in a different area of its body.
You know, in Sunbathing in the Rain, which is a marvelous book and a hybrid
Thank you. Yeah.
of a personal account and reflection and advice, you actually write quite a bit about writer's block.
Yes,
And
yes,
the kind of blocks that you had, particularly with two languages
Yes.
and cultures, and the thing that you described at the beginning of freeing yourself up to by coming to the U.S.
Yes,
in a way.
that's right.
And so I was wondering what happens now when you get stuck. I won't ask you about writer's block because you wrote a book that has so much of that in there, right? But have things changed for you in terms of those moments where you go, now what?
Well, there's a kind of amnesia for this process that goes on. I mean, whenever I say to my husband, I'm never going to write again, and he says, you always say that. And I said, I've never said it before. And he says, yes, you have. And it's always a sure sign that something's about to happen. And then the other thing is, this is too difficult, I can't do it. And he says, you always say that. And I say, I've never said it before, I really mean it. And that's part of the process. I don't think of writer's block as writer's block. I think there are reasons, there are various reasons in your life that you're not honouring the craft or the art. And I've always seen it as, for me, there's a connection between not having the right kind of address to poetry and things not going well in life. And that includes suffering from depression. Whereas I think if you have a healthy take towards things like not knowing, which you spend a lot of time not knowing whether you're dealing with rubbish or not as you write, not being sure if it's going to work out. You spend a lot of that time in that territory. You learn not to be quite as daunted by these conditions, and you learn with experience to not let it ruin the rest of your life, because you also have to carry on living.
So you come back. Do you let's say write something that's totally unsuccessful, dissatisfying?
Yes.
Put it away, come back to it?
I always keep them. And you never know, but I do have a lot of unsuccessful things in the drawer, yes, I do. And that's the beauty of writing, is that you don't have to do it in public, and that we don't have to show anything that we don't, think is okay.
All right, speaking of public, let's open up the discussion for everyone here. Now, whoever starts first gets the microphone. And again, we want it so that you'll be on the recording, not that we have to broadcast in the room here. And then when you're done and someone else wants to speak, pass it to that person. Okay? So, here we go. Okay.
Just in relation to your carpal tunnel, I'm wondering, do you use the same tools to write poetry or prose, or at the various stages in your writing? You know, when do you go to the keyboard? When do you write with a pen or a pencil? Or
I mean, it's two plays and a novella have done for my carpal tunnel. I write poetry on paper with a fountain pen. It's a question of respect and of being dressed properly for the muse. Although you can write it with anything. I'm not fetishistic about it, but you know, that is my preferred method. But I will write with anything. Prose gets done on the computer, and yeah, that's basically how it works. But the poetry, I kind of need to see the whole thing, and it usually is possible to see the whole thing. Yes, but I'm rather old-fashioned in that way. Would you like to pass the mic?
Yeah, pass the mic right over here. It'll take a moment. That way we'll be assured.
I want to hear about solving problems in dreams.
Yes. Well, part of the skill of writing over a long period of time is trusting your subconscious to come up with a solution that's better than what you would deliberately think. I come up with lines, little snatches of words that come up I mean, I'm sure this happens to everybody, not just poets. Things that come in the middle of the night and you think, oh yes, of course, why didn't I think of that? I think there's also a good method in, let's say, I swim a lot and I get quite a lot of ideas as I'm swimming. It's a question of taking your mind off the intention to do anything. And there's that paradox, isn't it, that then you fulfill your intention by not aiming for it. I think it's part of that. But I did write once, dream a line of poetry, which I haven't been able to use ever, and it's something to do with spent rocket fuel. And I thought that was the most poetic thing I'd ever heard. It's lousy, but I thought it was pretty impressive in my sleep, you know.
Well, I'll let other people ask. I was going to have some follow-up with what you were saying there.
Why don't you follow up?
Well, the thing, when you're swimming and you come up with an idea, a lot of people do this.
Yeah.
It may be the alpha, whatever. You know,
it's something like that.
You're in the
it's
zone
the alpha waves.
But it is this thing where you're distracted,
yes,
so to speak,
that's
so
right.
that you can then think about it.
Yeah.
I know this happens with students in my classes all the time because
yes.
they're looking at me and I know they're thinking about something else. But so how do you remember?
No, you have to park them somewhere.
Where do you park?
Well, I park them there, just there.
Right.
And it's a spatial thing. In fact, I remember asking some poets in Wales where their muse was in relation to their body. And everybody had a different answer. Mm-hmm. You know, for some people it was there, for some people it was there. It's because, you know, when things are going well, it's a physical a sensation. I've heard people say it's a bit like a headache in the temples. My stomach is where it goes. I know it in my stomach. Mm-hmm. So, yes, but I think you have to lock it off in some form and have a mnemonic. I mean, I do lose bits and bobs. Yeah. But I usually have a mnemonic using the first letter of the thought. So if I'm thinking of, how shall I say, peppermint, if I come up with a line about peppermint tea, for example, I would say, right, number one, peppermint, P, and then something else would be an O, but quite often I forget what the P and the O stand for. So they do get lost, but it tends to work most of the time.
Well, especially swimming. It's very hard to jot something down.
You can't
right,
jot, no, no.
Do you ever get ideas in the shower? This is something I've
Yes.
found for a
Yeah,
lot of people.
shower is very good. Washing dishes is very good.
All of those kinds
Yes,
of
it
things.
is. Yeah.
There is one professor here who gets so many ideas in the shower, she put up a grease pencil board and actually writes in the shower.
Is that interesting?
Yeah,
Oh,
so.
Yeah,
So, there, pass the microphone back there.
I'm curious about bilingual skills. One sees a poet's work translated or an author's work translated into another language. Have you ever tried translating a Welsh poem of yours into English or vice versa? And how does that scan for you?
Well, it's an interesting process. I don't like to translate my own work. I find it boring because I've already done one poem. And there is a way in which there are two different audiences for the two different languages. So I want to write a completely separate poem. But when I have translated literally, I can do it in one draft, straight off, with the rhymes in the right places. So it's as if there was another version going on at the same time in my subconscious. So even when one language is being written, two are there. So there's something strange. There's a shadowing. One language shadows the other, I believe. Yes, you wouldn't expect it.
English and Welsh really
Not
don't
related
have
at all,
anything,
no,
yeah.
no. And in fact, metrically, they're quite different.
Does Welsh poetry rhyme?
Oh, yes. Yes, we do rhyme to the nth degree. Internal rhymes, assonance, assonantal rhymes. Oh, goodness me. In fact, Welsh strict meter poetry makes the sonnet look like free verse. Yeah, so it's extremely intricate and ancient.
Here we go.
You mentioned the distinction that the writing emanates from
Yes.
life, and the life springs from the writing.
Yes.
Could you elaborate on that distinction?
Oh, yes, that's a creepy one. It's something to do with the fact that I can only live my life fully by integrating writing into that. And writing is not a thing that happens post facto, after you've done something. The whole process of perception is happening as you write. Otherwise, it's not creative writing, it's expository writing, which is different. Because the realization is embodied in the form of the work. So I can't possibly know something before I've written about it. Now, you know, I like to eat, I have to earn a living. You know, there are ways in which one has to plan and live a normal life. But psychically, there's something about getting, writing gives you a second body. And it's a strange kind of double life because the second body is not quite the same as the first. There's a kind of impersonality to the second body that is almost akin to a religious practice for me. It's not a religion, that's different, but the discipline of it calls on many of the same strategies. So for me, it is a spiritual matter, and I can only envisage a future through knowing what I've done in this second body. I think that's as much as I can say about it because it is a mysterious process. But I have heard it said about, for novelists, that they can look back at their work and see that they then live it after in a more narrative way. It's not quite as clear, the relationship perhaps in poetry.
Do you ever find that the poem, well, yeah, I think you sort of said this, the poem writes you? You know, that
I do.
Is, that
That's a very good way of putting it, because in fact the poem changes you. And you know, when Yeats is talking about the perception, the perfection, you could have either the perfection of the life or the work. I think he's talking really about which is the final destination for you. And I think that perhaps they're two stages of the same process, not two opposing entities.
Well, and do you ever get a sense of, like, channeling? Someone else's voice is coming through you, that you are speaking. For example, I think of the myth that you're,
Yes.
you know.
I'm laughing because I think I have difficulty enough channeling my own voice. So it's, hello, is there somebody there?
Okay.
But it is actually not me, Gwyneth's voice. It's a kind of other, more impersonal Gwyneth. But it comes through my persona. I don't mean to sound as if it's a Ouija board thing. It's not. But I will. I have had a rather spooky experience of noticing an image in my poems, which would be quite long ago, and then to realize that actually, oh goodness me, that image became more important in my life, not less, and that you know, images to do, say, with going to sea. And my husband and I did end up going to sea and sailing quite a long way. We went from Wales to North Africa just in a two-handed boat. And that came out of metaphor, really. There's a way in which you exchange metaphors and you live them, and you live things, and you exchange. There's exchange that for metaphor. There's an economy going on between figurative language and the lived life that is quite thrilling. And that's the good bit about being a writer.
I guess be careful of your metaphors.
Indeed.
You know, could be dangerous.
Yes, I think that's a very important point.
I think of some writers whose metaphors may have...
Got them into trouble.
Yeah.
Yes, I think that's true. Yes.
I don't. Where is? Well, you want to follow up on that? Oh,
Do
there's
you have control over that?
You have control over? Is that what you're asking?
Well, yeah, I'm getting back to that topic where you're saying that you're seeing something as an image in your poetry,
Yes.
and then later, in like retrospectively looking back and saying, oh yeah, I'm doing this because later that was like brewing around in my subconscious for a while. So, do you think in that way when you're writing?
No.
Like, you
You're
just
not
kind of
thinking that
go
way.
with it.
No, it's a question. I think I'm not aware of it. One isn't aware of it. If you were aware of it, you would write.
You'd be terrified.
Well, you'd either be terrified or you would try and write the wrong things. You would inevitably write the wrong things, and you'd be doomed and go mad, and it would be a terrible thing. I mean, I think it only works that way if there's the way in which you do have some control over it is a meticulous attention to honesty and to making sure that you use that the expression of what you mean is as accurate as it can possibly be. If there's a cloudiness in any of that, I think, I have had the experience where you can run into trouble psychologically, and things become rather unmanageable. Yeah.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Someone back there, want to pass it back? And as you're passing it, let me ask you, have you gone through a stage of imitating?
I'm still doing it. I mean, of course, you learn and learn and learn from everybody. And I think the aim is to be a sort of porous person. You know, we're not Yes, I use everything I can get my hands on, and my ears are flapping. You should be very careful what you tell me, because I use it.
Right, writers steal, I mean, all the time.
Yes, they do.
There's a whole kind of debate, discussion about that, and plagiarism.
Well, there is an issue of plagiarism which has a strict legal definition.
Yeah.
But in terms of influence, I mean, I think writers, that is one of the ways you cut your teeth as a writer. And I think if you're going to continue to grow, you have to continue to read and be admitting people with different points of view and different rhythms into your mind.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I'm interested in what you said about the pervasiveness and richness of rhyme in Welsh verse.
Yes.
And also something that you said in an interview that was in the Stanford report, where you talked about how the Welsh language has lots of consonants, but that they're soft edges and that they rub molecules off of each other, whereas English makes the road straight by force.
That's it.
Would you recite something, a
Yes,
short
of
piece of
course.
verse for us in Welsh?
Yes, I can recite just a little verse, but this is how strict it is, Stephen. Uchelgair yw chywelgi, gyr y byd e gerbydau drosti, chwythau holl longau y llu, ewch o dan ni chydwyni. Now that's just a four-liner. But the metrical patterns in that, there are correspondences of accent, consonants, rhyme, and consonants. I think that covers it all, and then some internal rhymes as well. So it takes a lifetime to learn this skill. And in fact, when I was 14 or so, I got invited to go with the local poetry group, which is a group of middle-aged men, to go and learn how to do this, because you have to be trained in it. But I was very shy because these men, they were, I don't know, I got very shy. I'd have to explain a bit more about that. But I was taught, and a teacher of mine in school, I used to go to her classroom. I'd run away from my friends and go off to write poetry in the break. She would teach me this system and mark it. It can be correct or incorrect. So I was very grateful to that teacher for teaching me that. But it's not my preferred mode of writing. But many people do practice it, and there are national competitions in it, which are extremely popular, because a lot of this verse is comic, as well as profound. So does that answer?
Well, I know the Welsh choral tradition is very rich.
Oh yes, that's something separate. But we do like we like talking, and we like doing things together. Yeah.
Well, one thing, though, that you just raised about going to the writing group with the middle-aged men as a 14-year-old girl.
Yeah.
What is the gender dynamic? I know asking Yvonne Boland about being a poet as a woman in Ireland was not easy.
No. Well, I was welcomed by this group, and but I didn't feel comfortable because they were very kind. So I can't say that they didn't allow me into the group. They did. But, I remember being told as a teenager, oh, well, you can't be a poet because you're the muse. I thought, this is an example of the metaphor being wrong for a woman. In fact, the muse is not a person at all. It's an aspect of language. No, it's taken me a long time to work that out. But I found that extremely destructive comment for a long time, because it's quite hard to allow yourself to make a fool of yourself on paper, which is what you do first of all, before you have worked on your poem and before you are experienced enough to know what might work or might not. There is a group of upcoming and the current Welsh women poets in Wales who are leading poets. In fact, you could say now that most of the leading poets are women. The current national poet is a woman. So I think, though, and I'm thinking about this increasingly, that there is a particular female aspect towards language, which is different from the male one, but it's a very difficult thing to pin down because we are male, male and female in our brains, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
In one person is what I mean.
Right.
Yeah.
You had spoken before about coaxing poetry as a shy animal. What was your experience bringing forth the plays and the novella?
Plays are very difficult. They're the most difficult thing I've done. I'm writing verse plays, so that there's the poetry in them, but I find the disciplines of ensuring that the action isn't just something decorative is very difficult. And that thing of catching the way people speak to each other, I don't know, I'm lost in admiration for playwrights because it is really difficult. But on the other hand, it's a uniquely rewarding medium because you're using somebody else's body. Isn't that fantastic? I mean, a group of them, megalomania, it'd be great. But no, I found the plays very difficult, but enjoyable. In a nightmarish kind of way, because I am writing about the Clytemnestra myth, which is pretty potent stuff psychically,
But in writing a play, you have this other element of revision, so to speak, maybe more immediate than writing a poem, which is workshopping or audiences,
that's
previews.
Right. Yes, that's
right.
I imagine I'm going to be rewriting till the very last minute on the plays, because the minute you hear it in a voice, you know what works and what doesn't. It's a terrifying medium, I think. Yes, I think the collectivity of it and the way in which you need the input of so many people to make the thing work, it makes it highly skilled, I think. Really an extraordinarily difficult medium.
Have you found yourself changing or adapting at all to try and meet the pressures of that process that's different from the writing of the poetry?
Well, this is part of a process I'm going to be discovering because I haven't even workshopped yet. And that will happen later on this year. So I'm going to learn a lot more. I mean, I'm completely new to this experience, but one thing that I think helps is that I've always thought of poems as little theatrical pieces with always a speaker. I mean, I always teach my students to know who your speaker is and to imagine who the shoes. If you don't know what kind of shoes the speaker in a poem is wearing, there's something wrong with the poem. So that, I guess, is fairly theatrical, but it's different from writing a proper play. It really is.
Yeah, back there.
You said we're all male and female within our brains. I'm curious as to what you mean by that.
Well, I'm not a neuroscientist, but it seems to me that there are ways in which, for example, if you're educated, I think the education has perhaps taught us to prize the more traditional male characteristics of, being cerebral. I mean, this is all caricature. I feel embarrassed even hearing myself saying this. But, clarity, logic. I don't buy that the female side is the less clear. That is not true, because I think that perhaps the female side is more clear. But I don't know quite how to describe this yet. I don't have the language for it. I was talking to, I won't speculate about that because I'm not too clear, but I believe that I was talking to one lady in Harvard last year who was saying that there really is no difference between the male brain and the female brain. There's a hormonal difference. But there's certainly a different social experience that would change your voice anyway. Because what you have to do with your voice in order to be heard is different. So the pitch is different. That's one thing I do know. If anybody has the answer to that question, I'd love to hear it.
Here we go.
Several things you said that got me to wondering, to what extent does your process is writing and maybe generally thinking word-oriented, and to what extent is it visual? For instance, when you're writing a poem, you were describing the speaker. Is there like a strong visual component to that?
Well, I did one of these questionnaires once that says, are you, right side of the brain, left side of the brain? And I'm fairly ambidextrous. So for me, I think they're both, because you're trying to press words into the service of the visual, and the visual into the service of, the words. Because we're always talking about something, aren't we? There's two ways of listening to a conversation. You can listen to what is being said, and you can listen to the way it's being said. And they're usually quite different, or they can be quite different. Mm-hmm. I love you. That's there's an obvious scenario going on there.
Don't throw me in jail.
But it's and there's a third thing which a playwright would be interested in, which is the body language. So there's a way in which all these things play against each other, or can go together. That's a good question.
We got over here also. Pass.
Hi.
Hi.
I was just wondering, you were saying before that you don't always feel inspired when you write. You have to apply some discipline. Do you find that you've written so many different genres of writing that you can switch between them effortlessly? Or do you find that you have to sort of focus on one style, and then maybe you don't write poetry for a while because that requires a different aspect? And
yes, exactly that. I mean, I think there's a way in which I like to have one main thing going on, but sometimes when things are going well, I would be writing poems and then coming in to write a play, and I would always put the poems first because they're the most elusive. Whereas there are forms in which, for me, there's more willpower involved. For example, with a commission, there's the discipline of the deadline. So I know I have to do a certain number of hours every day if I'm going to deliver. So the way I cheat myself is to say, I need to deliver 250 pages to this person. It doesn't have to be good, I just have to deliver it. And of course, you make it as good as you possibly can. But that's a particular commission discipline. But the difficult things are the things that are unfolding that are uncertain, and that would be the poems. And that requires a bit more tender, loving care, and that's pajama time, prime time.
Right next to.
Do you have children, and was there a time, if you do, in your life where it was hard to tend to your own writing because other people had needs, and how did you navigate that?
Well, I don't have children of my own. I've got stepchildren and step-grandchildren. So I haven't brought up children myself. But I think it's. I had a job at the BBC, which was quite demanding. I think there's a way in which you have to snatch. I'm a great believer in the 10-minute rule, that you can do, if you do 10 minutes before going to work or before somebody wakes up, you've not done nothing. And you can do a lot in 10 minutes. It's surprising how much you can do in 10. And I think there have been times in life when I don't have the freedom to do what I like. And I just concentrate on doing what I can. I think that's probably all you can do. But it's a question of concentration for those 10 minutes. And even if it means getting up early, which I used to do, before, so that the rest of life didn't get everything. So I imagine it's the same with children.
Yep, over there. We're going around in a circle.
Yes.
The main thing I want to say is thank you so much for sharing so personally. I mean, it's so different from what I get on a TV screen or something. I mean, this is you. And maybe just to push that a little more, it's almost inspirational to hear your description of being inspired. And I'm wondering if you can just push on that a little bit to help explain it to us, because it's really a beautiful thing that you've done to take your time to explain that.
Well,
maybe it's impossible, but I want to say thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I don't know that I can say anything more about being inspired, but I think, excuse me. I think it's really related to how you live your life. For me, it's a lived thing. It's not an add-on. And it's not an optional extra. It comes out of little decisions made all the time. To pay attention to this or not. To pay attention to this flower and learn its name or not. These are small decisions that are taken over many, many years that then come into play when they're required. And you don't do them thinking, okay, I'll learn the name for datura because I'll need it in a poem one day. No, you learn it because it's a pleasure to know what those flowers are called, for me. So I'm just, I consider myself very fortunate to have a medium in which those can come together, all those different pleasures. But it does have its hazards as well. It's not, it's a pretty rough world out there for poets and playwrights and people of such kind. So that qualities which are an asset while you're writing, such as being open and uncensoring of yourself, become a liability in the political situations, for example, in which we often find ourselves, anybody who has dealings with the world, or in the commercial marketplace. So there are difficulties, and I struggle with those all the time. But there we are. So that's not a very inspiring answer. That's a realistic answer.
Well, you also, you worked in the BBC with deadlines. You also worked as a journalist. You did other kinds of writing work that in some ways plays against, or maybe with, that kind of process, right? Certainly it's developed in you, this sensibility of writing as everyday work, right? As something that you do.
Yes, except, and also, I loved working in the BBC, and what was great about that was learning a certain kind of lack of fear about deadlines, knowing what is required to get things done. But you see, there's always the possibility with a poem that it might not happen. I just was asked now today, a few weeks ago, to write a poem for a professor of astrophysics in Cardiff who is retiring. Would I write a poem? And I'm thinking, I'll try. Nothing came. And I'm thinking, I really would like to write a poem for Mike, and fortunately something came at the last moment. But it could not have. And I just don't know. And that requires a certain humility.
Just out of curiosity, when you were asked the question about inspiration and you chose an example of learning things, you chose a hallucinogenic plant. Is that a coincidence?
Have you ever tried datura?
No.
No, neither have I. Learning the name is enough for me, thank you. Yes. Although I'd be interested to know about the effects, if anybody here has tried it.
Especially in your pajamas. Well, maybe this is a good point
I think it is.
to wrap it up. The datura is outside, anyone who would like it. But what's in here are copies of Gwyneth's books, and you're welcome to buy them and have you sign them.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming. Thank you.
For more, please visit us at stanford.edu.